In a quiet neighborhood, a routine evening for John turned into a nightmare he'd never forget. As he walked home from work, the flashing lights of a police car suddenly engulfed him. Confused and afraid, John found himself face to face with officers demanding answers he didn't have. "What did I do?" he pleaded, his heart pounding with fear and frustration. The tension escalated quickly. Despite his attempts to explain, John was handcuffed and placed in the back of the cruiser. The neighbors watched in disbelief as he was driven away, powerless against the unjust accusations. The night stretched on with uncertainty, his mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. This gripping real-life story raises questions about justice and prejudice in today's society. Stay tuned to find out how John's encounter unfolds and what it reveals about the challenges faced by many in our communities. As John sat in the back of the police car, his mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. He had always been cautious, avoiding trouble and focusing on his job at the local community center. So why was he being treated like a criminal? The officers didn't offer much explanation, only vague statements about suspicious activity. The drive to the station felt endless. John's thoughts drifted to his family, who would be wondering why he hadn't come home. He thought about the kids at the center who looked up to him, and the example he tried to set for them every day. At the station, the questioning began, but the officers' accusations didn't add up. They insisted he matched a description, yet refused to show him any evidence. John's frustration grew, but he knew one wrong word could make things worse. Something about this situation felt deeply unfair and eerily familiar. As the hours dragged on, John remained in the small, cold interrogation room, replaying the events in his mind. The officers pressed him with questions that seemed designed to trap him. "Where were you at 8 p.m.? Why were you walking through that neighborhood?" Each question felt less like a search for truth and more like an accusation. John answered honestly, but it was clear they weren't listening. Meanwhile, outside the station, word of John's arrest began to spread. A few neighbors who had witnessed the incident started speaking up, sharing videos they had taken on their phones. He didn't do anything wrong, one woman insisted, her voice shaking with anger. Back inside, John's frustration turned to quiet determination. He thought about all the times he had told the kids at the center to stand up for what's right. But how could he fight this system when it seemed so intent on silencing him? As the night wore on, John's patience began to wear thin. The officers still refused to provide any clear evidence or reason for his arrest, their vague claims of a misunderstanding doing little to ease his growing frustration. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been singled out unfairly, and the weight of the situation pressed down on him like a heavy fog. Outside, the small group of witnesses had grown into a crowd. People from the neighborhood, outraged by what they'd seen, were demanding answers. Some held signs hastily made from cardboard, while others recorded live streams, calling attention to what they believed was a clear case of racial profiling. Back inside, John noticed a shift in the officers' demeanor. They were whispering to each other, glancing nervously at a monitor showing the growing crowd outside. John's heart raced. Something was happening, but he didn't know if it would make things better or worse. The tension in the room grew thick as one of the officers stepped out, leaving John alone with the other. The silence was unnerving, but John couldn't let his fear show. He had to stay calm, no matter what. Just as he started to gather his thoughts, the door swung open again, and the first officer returned with a folder in hand. "We've got new information," the officer said, avoiding eye contact. He placed the folder on the table, but instead of clearing things up, it only deepened the mystery. John could see photos inside, blurry images of someone in a hoodie. "This is supposed to be me?" John asked, his voice steady but laced with disbelief. The figure in the pictures looked nothing like him. Outside, the crowd was growing louder, their chants echoing through the station walls. One of the officers' radios crackled to life, reporting that media crews had arrived. Panic flickered across their faces, and John realized something they didn't want to admit. They were losing control of the narrative. As the tension reached its peak, The station door burst open, and a senior officer entered the room. He carried a commanding presence and a file that seemed far more comprehensive than the flimsy one on the table. "Let him go," the officer said firmly, glancing at John before turning his attention to the other officers.